What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports here on the Michigan channel at the voice of college football. We're going to preview the 2023 schedule. Before we look at 23, let's look back at 2022. Here was the schedule from 2022. You see a perfect record in the regular season, 12-0. A very weak non-conference schedule. We all knew that going into last year. Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn. Surprisingly, UConn probably was the toughest non-conference game for them. UConn wound up having a pretty good year. But again, you look at the schedule. The Big Ten outside of Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State just was not very good this past season, so it really didn't matter who you played. We thought the Iowa game on the road was going to be a really tough game. And it was a tough game. That's always a tough place to play, but Iowa was not a top 25 team. So you had them out of the West. And you also had Nebraska. We thought maybe they were going to be a tougher game. Illinois wound up being the toughest game out of the West, so it's interesting how UConn wound up being the toughest non-conference game. Illinois wound up being the toughest non-division game. And then you look at Ohio State on the road, thought that was going to be a tough one, but they were able to take care of business there. Really a schedule that wasn't all that tough, again, because the Big Ten West wasn't very good, and they just didn't have a very tough non-conference schedule. It's going to be pretty similar in 23. So here are the games outside of the division. They'll play East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green. Really, no challenges there in the non-conference. East Carolina was pretty good last year. I'm not so sure this year that they're going to be maybe quite as good. So, yeah, no real challenges there in the non-conference. You look at the non-divisional games. You've got on the road at Nebraska, on the road at Minnesota, and then Purdue. Purdue with a new head coach, not really sure. Not really expecting a whole lot from them, plus that's a home game. Minnesota on the road, probably not all that tough. Nebraska could be a tough game with Matt Rule taking over. Some veteran guys coming back. Maybe they turn the corner next year, and that turns out to be a really tough game. But overall, outside of their division games, really no games where you're going to say that Michigan really has a great shot at losing. And let's go week by week now. They'll start with East Carolina week 1, September the 2nd. And then it's UNLV on September the 9th. Bowling Green, September 16th. So they will start off with their three non-conference games. And again, pretty easy wins there, you figure. And then you go to September 23rd. They'll play Rutgers at home. Another game that Michigan should win. So they're going to start 4-0. Really no doubt about that unless something crazy happens. But then there's back-to-back road games with Nebraska and Minnesota. And they've got back-to-back road games actually twice on the schedule. Nebraska, Minnesota, and then later Penn State and Maryland. But yeah, Nebraska, Minnesota, pretty tough games on the road. Michigan should be favored in those games, but you never know. And, it wouldn't shock anyone, I think, if they were to slip up in maybe one of those games. But they should be able to take care of business, and they really should start off 6-0 going into the second half of the season. They will have Indiana next. It shouldn't be too tough of a test. And then, rivalry game at Michigan State. Last year it wasn't really close. Michigan State has been kind of a hard team to figure out. They were much better than we expected in 21. They were worse than we expected last year. It is a road game. It is a rivalry game, so that one could be a little tricky. Then they'll play Purdue after that. They'll get a bye week after Michigan State. So you get a bye week. You get a chance to rest up and all that before the stretch run here in the month of November. Purdue next, again, on November the 4th. That'll be a home game for Michigan. Purdue, I'm not expecting to be a great team next year. We'll see. Penn State after that on the road. That is going to be a tough test. And I'll tell you what, the toughest 3 games on the schedule might be the final 3 games, because Penn State obviously going to be that's going to be a tough game, a tough place to play. This is a team with a lot of preseason expectations. People are putting them in that top 10 for sure. Some even putting them in the top 5 or 6 in the way too early top 25s. This is a team that has a lot going for them. They were pretty young last year. They have a lot of talent, and like I said, tough place to play. So that's probably, honestly, the toughest game right there. Penn State on the road. But Maryland, I think, could be tricky as well. You're playing on the road at Penn State. Then you have Ohio State after Maryland. Of course, you don't want to look ahead to that game. And Maryland was a young team last year. We'll see if they are improved this season. They weren't horrible last year. Remember, they gave Ohio State a pretty good game at home. So, that's pretty rough for a schedule overall. It's not that tough to have back-to-back road games twice. Nebraska, Minnesota, and then Penn State, Maryland. They do have 5 road games in the conference. They'll have 4 games at home, 5 on the road. So it is a little bit of a tricky road schedule there. Some opportunities for maybe them to slip up, but then they'll close things out, of course, with Ohio State on November 25th. They'll be at home. I think they'll actually be favored this year. And they've won the last 2 years, but they won as underdogs. I think they probably are favored this year playing at home. Ohio State with a new quarterback, unless they turn out to just be, better than I think most people expect them to be. Of course, they'll be right there in the mix, but I think Michigan might actually be favored this time. So overall, a schedule that it's not really all that tough, but it's tougher than you would think because of those road games, the back-to-back road games in Nebraska, Minnesota, and then Penn State, Maryland, and just the way they close out the season with Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State. That the arrangement of the games does make this schedule a little bit tougher, but overall a very manageable schedule for Michigan, and a schedule that gives them a great shot to get back to the college football playoff.